We're going to jump right into another talk in our Detox Your Relationship series. And no matter who you are, no matter what relationship struggles you have going on in life, even if your relationships are like all good and perfect and nice, this stuff is helpful for you. The stuff that God puts in His Word that speaks to our relationships is so important to get and to digest, to detox our relationships and move them to health. And that's my prayer for you in this series, is that this series would help us move our relationships, whether we're thinking it through in the context of our marriage, whether we're thinking it through in the context of our engagement with our just boyfriend, girlfriend, with our friends, with our besties, with our coworkers, whatever context you are thinking this through in, this stuff is really meaningful. And my prayer is that it will impact the way we relate to each other, that we would treat each other more Christ-like, and that ultimately we would be able to find more relational health. Today I want to talk to you about how quickly things escalate in our relationships, how quickly they can go from just normal to a complete mess, and how to kind of avoid that, deal with it, and rein back our emotions to treat each other well. When I was a kid, a teenager, I lived down Panther Valley Road, it's a little country road, not too far from here today, and it was a beautiful little property. Our house was set back. We had a big front yard, and that front yard was split, coming from right to left. If you were looking off of our front porch at that house, from right to left, it was split with a creek. It was a slow-moving creek, one of those creeks that when you get high water, it kind of, raises, but most of the time it had water in it. It was rushing down at a nice speed for a creek. And when I was growing up, this creek, it split our yard. It was a great place to find snakes, to do all kinds of things that young boys like to do, playing outside growing up. But this creek also was the only creek I know of to catch on fire. My dad, he was an impatient man sometimes when doing yard work, and that's fair. It's just not his favorite thing. It's not something that he enjoys doing a lot of, and I don't know if he appreciates me telling you this story, but guess what? It's happening right now. I remember being a teenager, and my dad was going out to burn some garbage. And right by this creek, we had a little old burn barrel. And every once in a while, I know you're not supposed to burn garbage. Please don't judge. We don't judge here. But back then, it was less of a big deal. My dad was burning just some paper products, some garbage, probably things that now, thinking about it, should have been recycled. But that's besides the point. He was putting all of this stuff into this bin, and he was going to burn this garbage, but his impatience was driving his decision-making. And it's crazy how often our impatience, or plug in any emotion you want to plug in there. Plug in anger or jealousy or passion. Plug in any emotion you want to plug in there. It's amazing how often, especially in our relationships, that our emotions drive our actions. My dad, in his impatience to light the fire and burn the garbage, to just get it over with, he decided that it would be a great idea to get the gas can from the garage to help speed up the process of lighting this garbage on fire. And so there he is, waddling down. I don't know why I said waddling. Moseying all down into the creek to burn this trash. And he gets some matches in one hand, and he grabs the gasoline in another hand. And you're right. If you're nervous about this story right now, that is a good feeling. Just embrace it. And he pours the gasoline all over the burn barrel, this rusted old burn barrel with holes everywhere. He pours it all over the burn barrel, sets it down on the ground, lights a match, throws it into the burn barrel, and as he's getting ready to celebrate his success, fire just erupts from the burn barrel. It catches, like literally, I'm not joking, it catches him on fire, and he's patting out his eyebrows and his arms as the hair is singeing off of him, and as he's getting the fire patted off his eyebrows and his arms, he happens to look down to see that the fire has leapt from the garbage can to the gas can, and now he is standing by a gas can that is completely on fire. What do you do? What do you do in that moment when you're about to blow up? What do you do in that moment when things are about to escalate really quickly? Well, my father, he thought, I'm going to kick this can on fire into the creek because water will put out the fire. And driven now by the emotion of fear, he kicks the can into the creek. But as some of you may have figured out already, gas floats on top of water. And so 4-foot flames covered the entire creek in front of our house as the gas just burnt itself off, moving down the creek. Our neighbors are panicked because the creek is on fire with huge flames. My dad is rushing down the creek. I don't know what he was going to do. What was he going to do? Splash some water, more water on it? I don't know what his plan was, but he's panicking and running down the creek. I guess just chasing the fire to see and make sure it doesn't catch anything else on fire, hoping that my mom is not watching from the house. She was. Don't worry. Phone in hand, ready to call 911. And it's crazy how fast things escalate, especially when our reactions and our responses are driven by emotion. And can I just be honest for a second? Far too often, the main driving force in our relationships is just emotion. And it creates this give and take where we are no longer responding to the person we're in relationship with. We're just reacting based upon whatever emotion pops into us at that time. And sometimes fear is what has been driving your relationships. You've just been reacting to the people in your life. You've just been reacting to your spouse because you're afraid. You're afraid of being found out. You're afraid of losing them. You're afraid of how you're going to deal with this situation. You're afraid of the conversation that needs to happen. And fear has just been causing you to react in avoidance or react in anger or react in jealousy to the person instead of really having a conversation and doing the work that needs to be done to bring yourselves to a place of healing. Sometimes it's just impatience that drives our reactions. Sometimes it's our own resentment or bitterness. Sometimes it's our own desires that are driving our relationships. But emotion, while it's an important part of life, while it's really a meaningful thing and it's an important, don't get me wrong, it's an important part of your relationships, but it's a terrible driver. And if your relationships are simply being driven by emotion, you're going to light the creek on fire. The flames are going to go out of your control. You're going to lose anything constructive and anything forward moving in your relationships. And emotions, they're a terrible driving force. And instead of reacting based on emotions, what we need in our relationships is to simply respond to each other, taking into account our emotions, but being driven by God's direction for us and God's instruction to us and how we should treat and live with and love each other. Emotions are a terrible thing to drive. They always have us reacting instead of responding. Have you been just reacting in your relationships, or are you able to just respond and think about what's happening and digest it and come at it from a positive perspective, or at least a constructive perspective? When we are just being driven by emotions. It takes over rational thought, and we no longer think about consequences. We no longer think about the damage our conversation is going to have on our kids, on our other friends. We no longer think about the consequences of what I say in a relationship. Rational thought just goes right out the window, and our emotions just run on the surface. Just like the gasoline ran on the surface of that water, creating great flames, there was a whole lot of really great stuff underneath it. A life-giving water underneath it. And in your relationships, if you're running just reacting on emotion, underneath that, underneath the fights and underneath the struggles and underneath the tension and underneath the pain and underneath the wounds, underneath it, there's some good stuff that you got to get to. There's some life left in your relationships. There's some hope. And when you're just being driven by emotion in your relationships, you never get to the deeper stuff underneath. And it's time. It's time to stop having your relationships be driven by emotion. It's time to stop just reacting. It's time to start following something bigger and better than you in how we relate to each other. There's a story in John chapter 8. It's an incredibly powerful story, and it's a story that escalated quickly. It's a story that got out of control very fast. And in John chapter 8, verse 1, it says this: "They all went home, but Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. And at dawn he appeared again in the temple courts where all the people gathered around him, and he sat to teach them." In verse 3 it says, "The teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman caught in adultery. They made her stand before the group and said to Jesus, 'Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. In the law Moses commanded us to stone such women.'" I mean, that wasn't like throw a pebble at them and say, "Shame on you." Like, this is a serious situation that is escalating very quickly, because here you have a woman's life at stake. And you have a group of people who are wanting to stone her based on a mistake she made. They were using this question, though, as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing Jesus. You see, the story is a story about grace, and as we get down through the end of it in this talk, you're going to see how important grace is in relationships. But the story isn't even really about the woman who was caught in adultery. It really wasn't about the man who also would have been caught in adultery, but strangely enough, they leave him out of the equation. It wasn't about her. It wasn't about him. This was about these religious leaders, these Pharisees and the teachers of the law, and their hearts. And that's what this story was about. You see, they came to trap Jesus. They were trying to hold this old law over him and see how he would respond. These religious leaders, they had so much zeal. Do you get that? Like, they were passionate about their religion. And anything that messed with what they were passionate about, well, they just wanted to attack it. They wanted to throw it out. They wanted to do whatever they could to tear it apart. And so Jesus, he didn't fit. They were passionate and had tons of zeal for their religion, but Jesus didn't fit into that box. Jesus completed the law and added on to it. He did so much more than what their religious box was about. And by the way, side note, Jesus will do so much more than whatever religious box you are operating from suggests. And this was about them and their hearts, and Jesus didn't fit, and so they wanted to trap him, and so they set this scene up. And because of their anger about what Jesus was saying, because of their fear about what it would cost them, because they were all twisted up, instead of digging deeper, instead of just seeking to understand what Jesus was teaching and what Jesus was doing, they rushed to trap him. They break into this poor woman's house or this man's house. And can you imagine what she had been going through? I mean, clearly they had not gotten to this point to make this decision without some real heartbreak and issues going on in their own hearts. But regardless of what their story was and what had led them to this place, these religious leaders and teachers, they break in, they grab her, they let him go, they drag her through the streets, humiliating her, showing her in front of everyone, probably cussing and spitting on her, and they drag her to this place where Jesus was, and they throw her down in front of him and say, "What are you going to do about this mess?" It had escalated so fast. And these religious leaders and teachers are a group of people we can learn from. Because so often, as terrible as it sounds, we react like them in our relationships because we let emotions drive. We rush to judge. And we don't just judge actions. I know we talk about that a lot at church. The Bible says a whole lot about judging others, and it's not good, and we don't do it. And God is the judge, and we are not. And these guys, they judged actions, but they also judged intentions. They judged actions of her, they judged the actions of Jesus, and they were judging the intentions of Jesus. And sometimes in our relationships, when we're being driven by emotion, we are quick to judge others. And it seems to me that the further we are away from them, the more we judge their actions. But the closer our relationship is with them, the more we judge their intentions below the actions. You wake up in the morning, your wife is tired and worn out because you didn't know this because you sleep like a log and you snore like a chainsaw. So you have no idea this is going on because you were like laying in bed with puddles of drool dripping out of your face onto your pillow. So you were completely unaware of this. But while you were knocked out, your wife was up 3 or 4 times dealing with kids who were sick or who had to go to the bathroom or who had a bad dream. And she's exhausted because while you slept like a baby in the fetal position, snoring away and dreaming of sausages, she was up all night. And so you wake up feeling great, and you're like, wow, man, what an amazing night of sleep. I have no idea why, but I really have a hankering for some breakfast sausages. And so you roll into the kitchen, you're like, honey, do we have any sausages? And she's like way over it because she has slept 0 hours or very few. And so she just has got like that one track, that one track mind, right? Like, just give me some coffee now or I'm going to kill you. Do you know that? Do you know that one track mind? Like, coffee now or somebody's getting murdered. And so she's just in survival mode, but you come downstairs and without knowing any of what's going on underneath the surface, without knowing anything more to the story, you ask her for a breakfast sausage and she just looks at you, that look like, she doesn't even have to say anything, just like, really? Like, that's what you're asking me for? You have no idea what went on last night and you're asking me with this cheesy little grin on your face like you just slept for 3 days, you're asking me for a breakfast sausage? Like, you have no... And we judge intention, right? All of a sudden, it's, what's wrong with her? Why is she miserable all of the time? I don't know what her deal is. Why does she treat me like this every morning? We don't know the whole story, but we judge other people. And we don't just judge their actions, but we judge their intentions instead of getting to the point. When we are being driven by emotions, we're quick to judge actions and we're quick to judge intentions. And if you have gotten to a spot in your relationships where you are judging the intentions of the other individual first without getting the whole story, you have to slow down. Give them the benefit of the doubt. And stop judging the intentions of others without understanding what they've been through, what they're going through. These guys, they're looking for leverage. These Pharisees and these teachers are just looking for leverage to use against Jesus. And the sad part is, when I'm being driven by emotions, I so often am just looking for leverage in my relationships. Well, what can I use to win this fight or this argument? What did they do wrong that I can leverage to prove my point, to justify myself, to make me look better than other people? We're quick to look for leverage, and we're quick to play the gotcha game. And that's what they were doing this whole time. We got you caught in adultery. We got you, Jesus. What are you going to do now? How are you going to get out of this one? We got you. See, we were right and you were wrong, and this proves it. And when we are being driven only by emotions in our relationships, we're quick to judge the actions of people we should be loving and giving the benefit of the doubt. We're quick to judge their intentions instead of truly having a conversation and getting to what's really going on in their story. And we're quick to look for leverage that we can use against the other people. And we're so quick to play the gotcha game. I'm right, you're wrong. Look what you did. Look at how I'm doing it right. And we use all of this to justify ourselves in our relationships. And like a creek on fire, those flames get out of control fast. The good news is, if you are in a relationship that looks like that, there's hope for you. You can experience healing and a renewed relationship. You can hit the rewind button and pull some of this stuff back if you get to the heart of yourself and you start to slow down and be driven by something greater than just you and your emotions. You can get to unbelievably healthy places in your relationships. And there's people in this room. They can testify because at one point, their lives were a mess. They were reacting all of the time, being driven by emotions. Their marriages were on the brink, and now it's better than ever. There's hope. There's hope for you. Jesus, he bends down as this group is standing in front of him. Imagine this scene. There was so much more to this story. He bends down and they're angry and yelling, "What are you going to do now? What are you going to do now? We got you." And here's this poor woman, her fate in the balance, thinking, am I going to die now? Like, is this it? Is my story over? I imagine her heart and the torment and the hurt and the pain she was feeling as she stood before Jesus, not knowing him, wondering, is this guy going to cast condemnation on me right now? Are these my last moments? I wonder if she thought about the people she loved and thought, man, I never wanted it to end like this, and I can't believe, if only I could just have one more day to fix those relationships, if I could only have one more day to say I love you, if I could have one more day to hit rewind and undo some of my mistakes and say I'm sorry and to just love some people and hug some people. I wonder if she was thinking that as she sat there beaten and spit on and mocked in front of Jesus with this crowd chanting for her death. I wonder if she thought about any of that stuff. And here Jesus, he just bends down and writes in the sand. It's crazy, the Bible doesn't tell us what he wrote. I really think it's because there's so much more to the story than what you just see on the surface. And I don't know what he wrote. Maybe he was writing stuff in those who would condemn her hearts. Maybe he's writing their own guilt, their own sin, their own struggles, their own broken relationship. I don't know what he bent down and wrote in the sand with his finger, but one by one, starting with the older and more wise of this crowd, they dropped their stones and started to walk away. And one by one, this woman, she heard the boom and the shuffle of feet. The crowd growing quieter. Boom. Another rock dropped, and the crowd got smaller and smaller and smaller as they left. But there was somebody still there. It was Jesus. And it seemed like to her, from what she gathered, as she sat there in her shame and guilt and fear, It seemed like that this was the one who would make the decision, that this Jesus was the one who would make the call on her future. And it says this, it says, Jesus bent down and started writing in the sand, and when they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, "Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone." And again he stooped down and wrote on the ground. At this, those who heard began to go away one at a time, the older ones first, until only Jesus was left with the woman. And standing there, Jesus straightened up and asked her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" "No one, sir," she said. "Then neither do I condemn you," Jesus declared. "Go now and leave your life of sin." There was so much more to the story. And here she sat in front of Jesus. And as everybody dispersed, he asked her, "Where have they all gone? Has no one condemned you?" Can you imagine her looking around for the first time in fear, looking for the faces that would judge her, the faces that would condemn her, and finding none, and then standing before Jesus as he says to her with love, "I don't condemn you either. Just go and sin no more. Go, move forward with your life better. Go, make some decisions that are healthier and good for you. Go, stop sinning and stop rebelling and stop choosing to have a life driven by your emotions. Just go and do it better. Chart a new course for your future." And grace just permeates the scene. There's 4 things I think you can do to start to slow down if your relationships have been driven by emotions. You ready for this? If like a burning fire, things have been running hot and getting out of control, if you've had some unhealthy situations and conversations you're dealing with, I think there's 4 things to help you slow down, and that's what I want you to do. Slow down in your relationships. And here's the first thing. Ask better questions. The guys driven to this, instead of talking to Jesus about what their objections were to what he was saying, instead of trying to figure it out, they set the trap and they ask a question that just is meant to trap Jesus. And so often in our relationships, we ask questions just to trap the people that we are talking to. Ask better questions. Get to what the deeper part of the story is. Proverbs 23:23 says, "Buy the truth and do not sell it." Wisdom, instruction, and insight as well. Are you just trying to win a fight? Are you really looking to understand the person you love? Are you really looking to understand what's going on in their heart and their life? To get their story, to find out what fears have been driving them, what frustrations have been hurting them. Have you been trying to ask better questions? Ask better questions. The second thing to slow down in our relationship is to communicate. It's to respond instead of react. It's amazing when we take that emotional layer off, how easy it is to have a conversation that helps us move forward. When we are not reacting to the other person, being driven by our emotions, but when we are just responding to them, it's amazing how you can turn a fight into a constructive conversation. It's amazing how you start to see all of the things you have in common, all of the fears you share, all of the frustrations you share, and you find a new starting point for moving forward. The third thing is to offer grace. Grace and start small. I mean, that's what this story was all about. Jesus, the one who could judge, in place of judging, chose to show grace. He showed grace and he let everybody know he was showing grace. And I don't know, maybe you can't go home today and show grace for the really big hurts you've experienced, but you could show grace for the little things that annoy you. You could go home and you could start small in showing grace to the people you're struggling in relationship with. Just by letting the little things go. By not reacting or jumping down their throat every time one mistake is made or one thing that frustrates you is said. Offer grace and start small. And you ready for the fourth thing? set a new course forward. It should not be lost on us that Jesus said to her after extending grace, "Go and sin no more." It should not be lost on us that he provided a way to move forward for her in her relationships, that he provided a way for healing for her in her heart, that he showed her it didn't have to be this way all the time. And he does that for us too. He shows us grace, and then he provides a way for us to move forward. He provides healing for our hearts, and he shows us that it doesn't have to be a mess all the time, that we can experience peace and we can experience joy through his grace. You see, in 2 Corinthians 12:9, he said, "My grace is sufficient for you. My grace is all that you need. It's made perfect in your weaknesses." My grace is what you need in the midst of your failures, in the midst of your relationship struggles, in the midst of your faults, in the midst of your bitterness, in whatever weakness you got going on. My grace is what you need. And it'll flex its muscles and show you a new path forward if you would just accept it. And that journey of experienced grace through Christ, it starts by meeting him at the cross and accepting that as your own. In James 1:19, it says, everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. What if you could slow your relationships down? Stop being driven simply by emotion. Start to look at what's going on underneath the story on the surface. What's the more to the story for her or him? What's the more to the story for me? And I don't know what struggles you have going on, but I know the path forward is to slow down and reacquaint yourself with the grace you can have through Jesus. Stop being driven in your relationships by emotion. And start to really get underneath to the real story and the real needs that are going on. Let's pray. Dear God, we thank you for this morning and the opportunity to worship you together. And I pray that we would learn how to follow you and your direction, that your grace would set the tempo of our lives and how we relate to each other. That we would be slow to speak and slow to anger and quick to listen and quick to show grace. Would you help us slow down our relationships? Help us to respond instead of react. Help us to get to the deeper story. Help us to show grace in the little things and eventually show grace in the really big things too. We thank you for loving us, for setting a new course forward for us. And if anybody hasn't accepted that new course forward, I just pray that it would start at the cross, through accepting the incredible sacrifice you've made for our sins as our own. In Jesus' name.